Some of you are probably already jumping out of the seat of your pants just at the sight of these. But yes, after all these months of waiting, it is finally time to take a look at one of these two compact Macs. We'll save the other one for later. And on this video, we're actually going to be focusing on the Macintosh Classic, which you can see there, which was one of the last Macintoshes to share this same basic form factor. In fact, it was the second last to share this same basic form factor. It's also notable for being the first Macintosh that's sold for less than $1,000. Now, calling it that is a little bit disingenuous, as a mosquito tries to ruin my video, because the initial sale price was $999, which is basically $1,000. So it is not necessarily below $1,000. I mean, it is technically, but calling it that, like I said, is a little bit disingenuous. You could instead call it the first to meet or break the $1,000 mark in the Macintosh realm. There were, of course, cheaper PCs out. But the other thing that makes it kind of disingenuous is that's for a base model Macintosh Classic. The model that you would actually want to have that was more comparable, although still not quite, to the SE30 that was out at the time, would have run you about $1,300 to $1,400. I can't remember the exact price, if it was $13.99 or $14.99 or whatever it was. I don't remember, but it was certainly more than $9.99 if you wanted features such as a built-in hard drive and upgraded memory. It is worth noting that the Classic is basically nothing more than a Macintosh Plus and a Macintosh SE, the original one, not the SE30, or maybe the SE FDHD, is probably more accurate, or SE SuperDrive if you prefer to call it that, merged into one chassis with a little bit of a facelift. You can see from Apple's earlier design, the SE, the SE30 was not much different from this, although it did have a different faceplate because you couldn't have the second drive. But anyway, you can see that it's a much more streamlined appearance. And again, as mentioned, it looks a lot like... Ooh, let's see if I can flip this up like this. A lot like the original Macintosh Plus. It's interesting to note there are no manual controls for brightness, contrast, like I believe there are, yes, on the SE here, for brightness. It's all done in software, which is a notable departure. Looking at the front of the machine here, it was more typical beige. The SE and SE30 were more of a grayish kind of color compared to the earlier Macintoshes. And it's got this very common look. In fact, it almost looks like a Macintosh 2 SI, without the power LED, and with a display on the top. It's also quite a bit smaller than the Macintosh 2 SI, because it wasn't really designed to have like a 12 or 13-inch monitor on the top of it. It still has the old 9-inch monochrome 512 by 384 display that previous Macintosh models used. The floppy drive is a standard Apple type. As mentioned, it's a SuperDrive, capable of reading and writing 1.44 megabyte floppies, or actually it's 1.4 megabyte on Apple discs. I don't know where the extra 0.04 went on them, but I guess they just don't have it. But anyway, it's a pretty standard SuperDrive. It's probably more the file system kind of thing, but standard SuperDrive. But that was all you got with the base model. You did not get a hard drive, even though this does have a built-in hard drive cage and place for an internal hard drive. The higher-end model came with a 40 megabyte drive, which is what this one's got in it. As mentioned, this is basically a Macintosh Plus and a Macintosh SE merged together to make one system. As such, it's got some drawbacks as compared to the SE, and maybe compared to the Macintosh Plus, although it is quite a bit faster than the Macintosh Plus, which is what it actually replaced in Apple's product lineup. This was the low-end Macintosh of its time period. Go ahead and we'll flip these around. The SE, I will note, for no other reason than I can, is significantly lighter than the Macintosh Classic. I'm not really sure why. Maybe it's plastic composition? I don't know. But you can see, I don't actually have it sitting out. I'm not going to pull it out of the box, demonstrate it, but the back of the Classic looks a lot like the back of the Macintosh Plus, as compared to the Macintosh SE over here. It looks like they thought about potentially having an expansion slot on the Macintosh Classic, like the Macintosh SE had, but it does not have an expansion slot at all. There is no processor direct slot on these, which was a significant downgrade, because they weren't necessarily expandable otherwise. There's no PDS, of course there's no new bus, no Classic Mac ever had new bus. This right here, the only reason why I believe that this exists is because previous models of the Macintosh, about the Plus and earlier, had a AA battery holder right here that was accessible outside of the case, instead of the 3.6 volt lithium battery that these newer Macintoshes use. I wish they would have kept that AA battery. It was much nicer. Didn't blow up nearly as violently as the batteries in these tend to do. You can see on the back here, Macintosh Classic. This is model M0420, which I believe would have made this the lower-end model. So it's kind of interesting that it's got the 40 megabyte hard drive and the upgraded memory. I guess those were added after the fact. But I'm not 100% sure on that. Somebody can probably address that in the comments. There was an M1420 model as well. And these are not the Classic 2, which is what replaced the Classic, or was sold alongside the Classic, to replace the SE 30. That was a different model entirely. There's a Kensington lock. Actually, I don't even think that's Kensington. That's definitely an Apple thing, which this has. There's the PDS on the SE. You'll notice that the SE has got two ADB plugs on the back, where the Classic only has one. Now, that is an improvement over the Plus, which had 0 and used the old RJ11 connector for the keyboard and the 9-pin connection for the mouse, which is not serial. A lot of people get that wrong. But only having one ADB port was kind of crippling, although given that it's not really designed to be expandable, it kind of makes sense, because Apple keyboards had one pass-through. So, again, like I said, it makes sense. And some mice, particularly aftermarket ones, had a pass-through for ADB as well. I don't know if you could daisy-chain more than 2 devices together. I can't say I've ever tried it. This does still have the floppy connector for an external floppy if you wanted to use it. It still has SCSI. Still has Apple Serial for both printer and for a modem, and an earphone output. Platform-wise, as mentioned, this is basically a Macintosh Plus. Well, actually, it's basically an original Macintosh SE, or I guess more accurately an SE FDHD, because it does have the SuperDrive in it. So it's still an 8 MHz Motorola 68000. It's still limited to 4 megabytes of memory maximum absolute by the ROM. And it's still, well, let's face it, it's still a compact Macintosh. It's still got the same limitations of all the previous models. Look at the curvature on that. Quite a bit better than the SE, which is more of a flat design. I believe the Plus and the original Macintosh was also kind of more of a flat-faced front, like this SE was. Again, it's a sign of the times. As mentioned, I think this one's been upgraded with the hard drive and also the memory upgrade. This thing actually has a maxed out 4 megabytes of memory installed in it. At least I believe it does. I know that it's got at least 2. And in order to install a 2 megabyte upgrade, instead of a processor direct slot, the Macintosh Classic included a memory expansion slot, which would allow you to plug in a module that added 1 megabyte to the onboard 1 megabyte, and would allow you to install 2 additional SIMs to give you a total of 4 megabytes. Alright, move the SE out of the way, since we're not really going to need to focus on it anymore in this video. Taking another quick overview of the computer on the side here, you can see some vents. I believe that those are punched out in the case. We've got the reset and programmer switches there. On the other side, there's nothing, except some more vents. Like the SE, and later, this does have a cooling fan that was added to the SE to address some of the problems the Plus had with overheating and premature failure. So, I don't think there's anything else that we need to do here, overview-wise, except go ahead and power it up. And one thing that you will note right away is the speaker is extremely quiet, which is kind of interesting. I chose not to punch out any openings in the side of the case for the speaker, or to relocate it. The later Classic 2 did have some punched out openings for the speaker, so it was quite a bit better. The other interesting thing you'll note is the chime, because this uses the older Macintosh ROM that was used, I guess, with the SE FDHD, not the SE30 ROM. So it still has what I would consider to be the first generation, or what I would call the first generation Apple chime. I don't know what the actual term for it is. Just the basic beep. Almost like the Lisa, except more pleasant. So, and one last thing before I power it up. This is not the keyboard and not the mouse it would have shipped with. It would have shipped with one of those. I believe the keyboard would have been similar to that one that's right there, except not quite like that. But it would have had the soft power on connection. But this does not support soft power on. It's got a hard power switch on the back. So, let's power it up. Hear the fan. Here comes the screen. Now, because this has 4 megabytes of memory, it does take a little bit longer than you might expect to complete its power on self-check. Now, here it comes. This is a pretty bare-bones installation of Mac OS. There's not much in the way of extensions. There are a few things, but not much. I don't know who made the hard drive in this. I was expecting to find a quantum drive, but I'm not sure it's a quantum. A lot of early Macintoshes had Connor peripherals drives. Some of them had Seagates. Still others had Maxtor drives. I think one of the two SIs over there has a Maxtor drive in it, before they generalized on quantum. I think people generally associate quantum hard drives with Apple Macintoshes. We go and we take a look here about this Macintosh. We have a classic, System 7.1, 4 megabytes of memory total. But if I open it up, you can certainly tell that this is a 40 megabyte drive, with some space taken up by the various bits of the file system. Being System 7.1, this probably is using HFS for the file system. Some basic stuff. This doesn't have anything really in the way of software. Does have some custom stuff. Again, there's a mosquito interfering with my video. And you can probably kind of get an idea that it's a little bit slower than you might expect for a system like this. System this new. This was released in 1990. Just because, again, it's System 7.1 running on top of a Motorola 68000 processor. Not the fastest thing in the world, but certainly doable. The video does not really do justice just how small this computer really is. It's got a carrying handle on the top, and these really were carryable machines that you could take home with you from the office, which was pretty nice. Back in the day, there were very few of them in offices. Most of them saw their use in schools. Things like that. As mentioned, there's no brightness control on the monitor itself. There's a brightness control panel here in software. And I think I've got this turned down pretty far. I've got about halfway. But it will go up quite a bit higher than that. And it will, of course, go to almost turned off. I like to keep it in about the middle for longevity purposes. Date and time, obviously the battery's bad. I think it was removed. If I remember right, it was removed. Maybe I should invest in some tools and pull it apart and make sure it was actually removed. Networking. Interestingly, this has Mac TCP on it. I don't know how you would add such a thing, because it does not have a PDS slot. File sharing, general controls, other various things. Going to the sound here. This will really demonstrate it, how quiet this is. You can barely hear the sound. That is as loud as it gets. Yeah, not that great, but not terrible. This does not support, does have disk caching, but it does not support virtual memory. I don't know if that was a thing in 7.1 or not. I think it was, because I'm pretty sure that 2VX, which is also running 7.1, did have virtual memory options. But that just really was not a thing with the Motorola 68000. It's almost like an Intel 8086 in a way. I don't believe it's 8-bit. I think it is 16-bit, so it would be like the 8086 and not the 8088. But it didn't really feature any memory protection. Which you can change the tracking speed of the mouse. Double click speed, other things like that. Pretty configurable. Without software on it, there's not really much I can do to demonstrate it. I know that it does have a couple of things. I think it had After Dark on it at one point, if it doesn't now. Go ahead and take a look at it. Or maybe I'm actually probably thinking of the SE30. It's for the SE, not this. So, ClarisWorks 2.0. And there are some files left over. I probably should open that file that was right there. But you can see how long it takes to load this. An SE30 would have had that done in probably about half the time. Let's see if we can open this. Open this file. Yeah. There are some other files on here. I don't know how many of them I can actually show. But there's some stuff here in the downloads folder. Let's see, this does have multi-finder. Let's see how much memory that actually is using. Not too much. Of course, it's probably not using all 100K of that. It's probably just reserving some for itself. Again, if you want to look up some of the intricacies of how the old Macintosh is used to do memory management, that's certainly available, and wow, is that ever an interesting read. I know that there's certainly other stuff in that folder, but I think we've pretty much run the course on this. So there's your Macintosh Classic video. Maybe not the best Macintosh Classic video out there, but certainly an overview and a description of the machine itself, where it fell in terms of the product line. The Classic 2 was basically an SE30 with a slightly updated ROM, but it was basically, again, the same machine. There was no PDS slot. I believe it came standard with a hard drive, a 40 megabyte drive. You could get it with an 80. It had a 68030 in it. Clocked at, what, 33 megahertz or 32 megahertz or something similar. I think it was 33 megahertz. It was still slower than the SE30 for some reason. Again, those details are not necessarily privy to this video. But the Classic 2 represented the final stage of the good old-fashioned Macintosh with the compact Mac with the 9-inch monochrome display, single disk drive, and convenient carryable baggage. There is the Color Classic, which was a reinterpretation of the design with a bigger screen. I think it was a 12-inch display. Maybe it was still a 9-inch, but it was a color display. Those aren't really compact Macintoshes, because it's a different design. Some people call the Macintosh TV a compact Mac, which I think is kind of stupid, because the Macintosh TV is an LC520, which is an LC, but anyway. A lot of it comes down to personal preferences. So we'll shut this thing down, and we'll shut this video down. And again, you'll see that this does not support soft power off. You have to switch it off from the back. Thank you for watching, and if you have any comments, feel free to leave them down below.